Hey, how are you?
Good to be here, man.
Likewise,
Thanks so much.
Likewise.
Appreciate it.
We've talked many times. I think it's the first time we've talked in person.
Yeah, man.
How are you?
I'm doing well, man. Pretty excited. I'm fat and happy right now.
Yeah.
Finally
This
back
is-
to the
this is
Garry
fat
Tonon
for you?
diet. This is relatively fat for me. I got back up to about 185, and now I'm about 175. So not that fat anymore. But
Wait, you after your fight you got to 185?
yeah, probably within the first 3 days.
Jesus. You just coming down on those burgers?
Kept eating over and over and over again. I mean, we had like a vacation thing in Phuket afterwards, so it was just
okay,
like
all
eating constantly.
Yeah.
So
You know what,
yeah.
man? I'll tell you this. I took a seminar. You came to my. I can't train anymore because I'm too old and I'm getting a kid. And I was. You know, it's true.
Sure.
A lot of people train. Let me ask you this: after a training session, just a regular one, no fight, whatever. How do you feel?
How do I feel?
Yeah. Do you feel good after a
It's
training?
interesting. So when I first started, I would say for the first few years, I would just physically exhausted. But as I got better and better, I would say probably somewhere around like year 5, year 6, training sessions got like much more efficient. So I feel like I don't expend as much strength and energy, so I usually feel pretty good. Now after a sparring session, because I suck, and because you're getting hit, it's a little different. After a sparring session, almost every time I'm very physically exhausted. So it's probably a combination of being not very efficient because I'm not great at it yet, and the fact that I mean, even if you are good, more than likely you're getting hit a little bit. So yeah.
No, I mean, I can't train anymore because I just got injured all the time, and I always just felt bad after training. But I remember you did one of your. I attended one of your seminars. It was the best seminar I've ever attended.
Oh, thank you, man.
Phenomenal.
Really
It was on leg locks, which I use that as my reference point for just about everything I know. Which is again not much, but it was really phenomenal. So I just wanted to tell you that face to face. It was really great.
Appreciate that.
All right, so you had a big fight, man.
Yeah.
Went about according to plan, huh?
Yeah, so this fight, I really didn't want to take any chances. I looked at this fight as a big threat because he had knocked people out before. I hadn't had any opponents that were a big knockout threat, maybe a TKO, but that didn't really see that before, so I was a little bit more comfortable in my previous fights. This fight, I just kind of felt like between the fact that I was fighting somebody more dangerous and the fact that it was such a huge card, their first card in Japan, they had Demetrius Johnson and Eddie Alvarez on there, Yates and Clyde, all these amazing guys. I just really wanted to make sure that I made a statement as best as I possibly could, in front of all the eyes that were watching, because I knew that's probably one of the biggest cards that one will probably ever put on. Yeah, I mean, it went about as good as it could. I didn't get hit much. I hit the other guy a lot, did a lot of damage. Walked away with my hand raised, and I thought it was a relatively exciting fight. And I think as a professional mixed martial artist, you can't really hope for too much more than that.
Yeah, that's about right. So a couple of controversies. The cell phone controversy. For folks who don't know about this, there's like this sort of like fake joke going around, semi-joke. There was something in your drawers, for lack of a better description. It looked like a cell phone. What was that?
Yeah, so it definitely was a cell phone. I had a girlfriend. She's now my ex at the time, and I got to Japan, and she was like, Gary, I feel like you're really distant. You're not giving me enough attention. So, I wanted to make sure that she was the first person I called right after the fight was over.
Good man.
So I had it in my back, right in the drawstring. So I pull it out after the fight. I'm super excited. Wanted to tell her that I was going to win, or that I won. And then this guy answered the phone. He said his name was Dillon. And and you know what? I just had to end it right there, obviously. So you know what? Just take that as a lesson, my fellow fighters and martial artists, that if your girlfriend is messaging you leading up to a fight or something, and she's being a distraction, she's not being supportive and constantly trying to take away from you, drawing attention to her, she could just be talking to some dude named Dillon, behind the scenes when you're not there anyway. So don't take too much stock into it.
So since you brought it up, I will go get into it. You know what's funny, man? I interviewed Dillon Danis. God, he must have still been a brown belt at Marcelo's at the time. I was doing an article, before I had this show, I was doing an article for this site on how the guillotine had changed in MMA.
Sure.
Because you remember years and years and years ago, everyone had the same guillotine. Then it kind of faded, and then it got good again.
Yeah.
And I was asking him, for his opinion on who was good at it. And he actually had some really good insight. And then this whole Conor McGregor thing happened. And you guys used to have beef back in the day, too, right?
Yeah, a long time ago.
I saw you guys, at grappling tournaments kind of get in each other's face a little bit. What would you say is the state of your rivalry with Dillon?
Man, I mean, we're two completely separate organizations right now, 2 different weight classes.
Same city,
though. Yeah, we live relatively close. So, we'll definitely see each other at certain occasions. Like, he was at Kasai, I was at Kasai. Although, to be fair, I was sleeping in the back for most of Kasai because I'm so jet lagged right now from traveling. But, yeah, man, I don't really have much of a problem. It's
whatever that beef was y'all used to have, it's over?
No, it's just, he's not really, like you said, like we live in proximity. We train in proximity to one another. But other than that, I mean, there's really no, I don't really harbor any like negative emotions. I mean, I'm just focused on fighting. I mean, at the end of the day, I've had 4 fights in a little over a year. I'm gonna have 5 fights in a little over a year. I just signed another fight contract that's gonna be happening relatively soon. Can't say when or who, etc. But I know, I hate to tease, but that's just how it is. They, until they make the first post, I can't say anything. But so I'm gonna have 5 fights in under a year and a half, I think. And I'm just letting the fighting speak for itself. People could argue who's the best grappler in MMA or who's, this, who's that. But at the end of the day, I'm gonna have 5 fights in a year and a half. At least I'll have something that people can talk about.
All right, but what do you make about his whole shtick?
Man, I mean,
Did you see that coming? Because honestly, you know him better. When I interviewed him low those many years ago, I would never have seen this coming.
I don't know if I would have said I would have seen it coming. I didn't know him well enough to really say that for sure. But I will say, like, my only comment to it, it's not the way that I obviously decided to go in terms of like how I conduct myself.
Sure.
It's hard to argue that it's not successful for him. He's been doing very well. And you could argue, maybe it's because he's with Conor and this, that, and the other thing. But at the end of the day, huge social media following, very controversial figure. People talk about him. So, I mean, the strategy's not working all that bad. I mean, he's doing well for himself. I think I would argue very well for himself compared to most other, grapplers that are involved in mixed martial arts. However, I would say that from a standpoint of if I was like the dude's best friend, like if I was Dillon's best friend.
Man, sure.
It would be hard. I'm not gonna name names. I don't know, whoever his best friend is. If I was his best friend, I would have trouble like being asked questions about him, like you're asking me right now. Like, hey, like, what's the deal with Dillon? I'd be like,
Yeah.
Like even Gordon says like crazy stuff, and he's my student, my teammate,
yeah.
My best friend. And
but
even sometimes with Gordon, I'm like, yeah, Gordon.
We had Gordon in studio. Gordon talks a lot of shit, but okay, I know he's injured now.
Sure.
But we had him in studio because he was promoting at the time. Remember, he was going to face Doom. Look, I don't know what's going to happen in Dillon's MMA future, but Gordon, when he's talking shit, is beating everybody. Like, it's almost like Conor when he had that run through featherweight.
Sure.
Talk your shit, man. You're the one out here just slugging Aldo to the mat in 13 seconds. You know what I mean? So it's a little bit different for me.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the same reason that you don't hear me like saying a lot of things yet in mixed martial arts, because I've only been in the sport for such a short period of time. I've only had 4 fights. Yeah, I talk about that like a lot in a short period of time, but I don't like, I don't know, I'm the kind of person that gets confidence from actually doing things. So if I'm gonna come out and tell you guys that I'm the best in the world, I have to like feel like I've done something to show it, or at least to prove it to myself. And I don't necessarily think that I'm quite there yet, to be starting to say things like that. Once I do feel that way, sure, maybe I'll come out and talk to you guys like that. Yeah. But like you said, it'll come from a standpoint of reality, not necessarily from, I don't know, whatever I've built up in my head.
Let me ask you, how'd you end up with one of all places?
So they just built a really good relationship with me early on. They had me out for a seminar, then they put on a grappling show. And I got to know a lot of their staff. I got to know Chatri, one of their founders. And they just seemed like really good people, really trustworthy. They seemed like they were looking out for the athletes. I liked the direction their organization was going. Their organization was growing. It turned out that after I already signed, they grew even more so with all these new names that they're signing. Man, I just think that more so than anything else, it was just the real world connection that I got from the people in the organization. Anybody else that had reached out to me, it was, I don't know, hearsay, mostly just via social media or like messaging and stuff. It wasn't anything personal, no real personal connection that I could attach myself to and say, hey, I get a general feeling about these people and how they're gonna treat me and how they're gonna treat my future. And I felt like one was gonna take me in a positive direction, and I think so far it was a great decision. And I think it'll continue to be. Like I said, it's only gotten better than I would have even imagined it would be when I first signed with them. So
it's interesting for a jiu-jitsu guy. It's like these guys, the really good ones, right? They relative to an NFL player, they sort of toil in obscurity a little bit. And now you're with a big organization, but it's all the way across the other side of the world.
Yeah.
Is there a part of you that's like, when am I going to get some hometown fame?
Yeah, yes and no.
I know you're not in it for the fame, but
no, I understand.
But the money comes with it, so it's part of all the package deal,
Sure. Well, I mean, it's like you said, like, if somebody mentions my name, for sure, it's going to be less relevant in the U.S. than it perhaps would be in Asia. And I live in the U.S., so yeah, I get what you're saying for sure. I think that they're moving in a direction where they could perhaps have events in the U.S. Like, I don't really know I can't say for sure. I can't predict the future, but based off of what I'm seeing, the fact that they got a deal with TNT, the fact that they signed DJ and Eddie, all these things start to kind of suggest to me that they're heading in the direction of potentially expanding their map to not just Asia, but also the U.S., Europe, all of those things in the future. They're hiring a lot of Dutch kickboxers and things too. Giorgio Petrosian, I could see them going into a lot of different places other than Asia in the future. I just think that's where they have their base, and they're doing a good job of expanding in Asia first, and then we'll see where they go after that. So I'm pretty confident that even with one, that I'll see that one day.
So you're you said almost a year and a half in.
Sure.
Right? Has it gone according? I mean, yes, you're undefeated. That's not exactly what I'm asking.
Sure.
Has it gone according to plan?
Yeah, overall, I mean, the biggest things that I wanted from whatever organization I would work with, and like we said, I decided on one championship. The biggest things that I wanted were people that I felt were going to look after my future well, that I wasn't just going to get tossed around and not cared about, not taken care of, and people that were going to give me fights. That I needed experience, I needed to have fights in a relatively short order because I'm 27 years old. Not to say that I'm old or anything like that, but as far as mixed martial arts is concerned, let's say I hadn't had any fights until 30 years old. I mean, now we're talking about maybe the peak of a mixed martial artist career is somewhere around mid-30s, right? So now I wouldn't even have my early experience until I'm in my mid-30s. So I'd end up peaking in terms of experience somewhere around late 30s, possibly 40. And I don't even know if I really want to be in this game that long. I don't know if I really want to fight till I'm 40. I really just genuinely don't know if I want that. I think I probably prefer to be done by 35, to be honest. I mean, as far as brain trauma and stuff is concerned, I just don't know how healthy it is to fight for that long of a career. But that's kind of what I was looking for, and that's what I got. So as far as I'm concerned, I got the experience. I'm being treated well. And I'm winning, so yeah, I'd say things are going according to plan.
You're one of those. You're one of the last of the Mohicans because it's still going to happen. It's always going to happen. You're going to get these people from jiu-jitsu that matriculate over to MMA.
Sure.
But a lot of that has stopped. I always use Keenan Cornelius and even Bouchecha, I suppose.
Sure.
As an example, these were two guys you would have thought prime. I mean, I know Keenan's a big gi guy, but even then he's a good no gi, right? So
no, he's not bad.
Yeah, he's all right. Bouchecha's obviously pretty good there as well, and they just decided not to. When you look back, I'm sure you have no regrets, but I wonder what you make of that. What's that going to do to both jiu-jitsu as a business, and what's it going to do to MMA?
Well, that's a good question. I think that what you're going to do, I think that what you're going to see actually is as guys from jiu-jitsu have success, like myself, I think that will inspire other people from jiu-jitsu to start moving forward in that direction as well. I think that there's been a lull in guys transferring from jiu-jitsu to MMA successfully for quite a while. So when people see other people do it, I think they'll be more, oh, you know what, Garry Tonon did it, so I know it sounds weird, but Garry Tonon did it, I can do it. You know what I mean? I see that happening a lot in the near future. So I actually think that there'll probably be more people coming over from jiu-jitsu to MMA because people are going to be successful from a jiu-jitsu background. But as far as what I think about what's been going on prior to that, man, I mean, I think it's a shame, but at the same time, I think it speaks volumes about where jiu-jitsu is now compared to where it was 10 years ago or 5 years ago. Because I think another reason why it's not happening as often is because jiu-jitsu is far more lucrative than it used to be 5 to 10 years ago. 5 to 10 years ago, you couldn't really make a living competing. Maybe if you were at the top level, you're making a living teaching a lot of seminars and stuff. But for the most part, the only hope of having a career was opening a gym, right? And that was the only way you were going to make money. Now these guys, a lot of them, they can start websites to teach, seminars, they can compete for money. There's a lot more career opportunities available there. I think in the early stages, not only was jiu-jitsu more successful in MMA, so people gravitated towards it, but that was where people could make a living. They're like, you know what, I've developed all these skills in jiu-jitsu for a decade or for 5 years or whatever the case may be. What am I going to do with this other than teach? How else can I leverage these skills to make money in the future? And I think that's what pulled a lot of people out of that jiu-jitsu world into the MMA world. And then it's a scary world. You're getting punched in the face. Some succeeded, some didn't. Some adapted and some did not. But I think that played into it as well.
Yeah, you don't see the same amount of wrestling matriculation either. You're still seeing a couple of All-Americans come through every year.
Sure.
But not nearly as much on that side. Back to jiu-jitsu for a second. You mentioned, I'm not asking for figures, but how lucrative is the seminar circuit? You know, it seems to me a hard way to make a living when you're going, I'm going to Austin, I'm off to Portland, and it's like $100 a head. It seems like okay money, but then I look at the seminars, and even if you have a bunch of people, it's not a rock concert, man. Like,
True.
What is it like?
True. I still think, like I was saying before, that there's only a certain tier of athlete that's going to be able to make a real serious living off of that. But I do think it's relatively lucrative. I mean, look at it like from a stand-up comic standpoint. There's a lot of stand-up comics out there. They do a very similar thing. They have to travel to a lot of different places to do their stand-up gigs, and a lot of times not for a crazy amount of money. I would argue it's probably more lucrative than that in terms of the amount of people that are going to be able to make money doing it and traveling and things like that. I could be wrong about that. I don't know enough about the stand-up comedy circuit.
No, that sounds right,
I'm just kind of saying that there's other career fields that are very similar in what you're saying. And I think, is it a little bit of a hustle? Like, do you have to work a little bit? Do you have to travel a little bit? Are your relationships going to be strained and things? Yeah, absolutely. But I think just the possibilities there. But 5-10 years ago, again, I don't know if that was so much the case.
One last question about this, and we'll transition to MMA for a
That's
moment. Okay. How hard is jiu-jitsu on the body? Let me ask it this way. Again, my own personal experiences, I just couldn't take it anymore.
Sure.
But then, okay, I'm just an average idiot. No one cares about me. But then I look at people like the Meow brothers. There's this famous picture of their fingers. Now, they're obviously a bit of an outlier.
Sure.
I'm not suggesting that MMA is the same because the brain trauma certainly is different, but the higher checks kind of like, well, let me see what, it makes you.
Could be more worth
it. Like, 30 years of jiu-jitsu, is that really good for a person?
It depends. I can definitely say it's actually like related to striking, like you just said. If you take a look at most Western boxers compared to Asian kickboxers, for instance, Asian kickboxers tend to have like 200 to 300 fights by the time they end their career, and most of them don't have a lot of serious brain trauma. You don't see nearly as many cases as Western boxers where guys are like slurring their words and they can't like function with their body properly. There's a couple reasons for that. One, I think because the fights and things are so frequent, their sparring is a little different. They don't do like crazy hard sparring the same way that Western boxing does. In the same way that, honestly, mixed martial arts in the West as well usually trains. They train very hard sparring. At least that's what I'm familiar with most camps that I've seen. And then the other thing is the damage distribution over the body. Like, they're kicking legs and things like that. The body not always focusing on the head, where in Western boxing, it's mainly the head. Of course, there's some body shots and stuff like that. Right. So bringing it back to your other question, which was, is 30 years of jiu-jitsu good on the body? Similar idea. I think it really depends on the way that you train. The Meow brothers, when they train and when they compete, take a lot of breaks. I don't know if it's a prideful thing or whatever, a competitive thing. I'm not really sure. But yeah, if you take a lot of breaks in training and in competition, like, it's probably going to be pretty hard on your body, and you may not function very well in the later years of your career or
when you say take breaks, you don't mean weight. You mean like physical breaks?
No, I mean they'll let things break, whether it's the ankle or knee or whatever. I've had matches with the Meow brothers and heard pops and things like that, and there's no tap, and it's fine.
They just let it ride.
There's plenty of guys that do that a lot, and I'm not saying I've never toughed out a submission before. I don't know if I've ever let something just like completely snap, but there's some guys that do that, man. I've had matches where I knee barred people and their knee completely caved in, and they didn't tap, and it's. So that's kind of like a personal choice, I think, sometimes, as to how much you're going to let jiu-jitsu impact your body negatively. The same way that in striking, I think you can make that choice. Like, am I going to do hard sparring 4 times a week or 3 times a week and just make every sparring session a fight? Or am I going to do like relatively light sparring more often? And those kind of decisions are going to play into your longevity as far as an athlete or as far as injuries or whatever the case may be. I think there's a way to train jiu-jitsu, especially if you're going to be a recreational player, where you're not taking quite as many of those injuries long term. But I'll say it definitely took a toll on my body. For sure, I have a lot of long-term injuries that I do.
Do you have like arthritis?
Not quite. No. Not in my hands anyway. In my feet,
give it 10 years.
My big toes, like, very separate from my other toes.
Why?
So I don't know. I was just born that way. I got fat feet, so they get caught in the mat a lot. So they're kind of just in a constant state of like swelling and pain. So yeah, I definitely have arthritis in my toes, but not really in my hands.
You don't tape them?
My toes?
Yeah.
Nah, I hate it. It feels awkward.
Oh yeah?
Yeah, it feels awkward for me. It's
So
like a sensory thing for me.
I got messed up big toes, totally different. Got it. I can't mentally function without
Yeah, without it.
because I've dislocated.
Maybe if it got serious enough, I would, you know?
Interesting. All right, so let's talk about the MMA equation here just a little bit. This is going to sound like a silly question, but in today's MMA, I feel like it's actually quite pertinent. What are your competitive and professional ambitions?
So the biggest thing is the main goal, you know, the long-term goal is to become one of the greatest mixed martial artists of all time. That's just, I think that going into a sport like this, if that's not kind of where your head is at and you just want to do this like super short term and like, I don't know if this is really the right sport. To me, it'd be crazy to go into fighting where like people are trying to knock my head off and not try to get some kind of grand result out of it. And just like, yeah, I just wanted to play around a little bit, have a couple fights. Like, that's terrifying to me. Like, fighting is terrifying to me. I don't know how much I can communicate that to people. Like, it's very scary. And the idea and possibility of getting like, you know, a lot of head trauma or getting KO'd in front of friends and family and things like that, it scares the shit out of me. So I'm taking on that risk, but for some greater result. Like, I really, you know, hope that I'm one of the greatest mixed martial artists one day. That would be the long-term goal. Shorter term goal, win a championship. Right? And then after winning a championship, focus on, and this is what you see a lot of mixed martial artists in the UFC doing right now. I'm sure many of them, sometimes they have the championship or sometimes they do not. After that's the case, they either go after multiple championships or they look in the direction of, all right, who is going to be the most exciting fight, whether it's out of my division or in my division, who's going to be the most exciting fight that I can put myself in so that the public goes, oh, wow, I'd really like to see that. And you're seeing people cross all different kinds of divisions, sometimes jumping 2 divisions now to make those super fights happen where, you know, people would just be really excited, whether it's stylistically, whether it's because of some sort of beef or whatever the case may be. People are going out of their way now to make those fights happen. So that will be another goal of mine, is to try to make those big name fights happen, those exciting fights, whether it's in my weight class or not.
So how much consideration, you must give some because the upside in MMA is so much higher than in jiu-jitsu. Financial, I mean, I know that's not the key aspect of your life at this moment.
Sure.
It can't be. You're at the nascent stage.
Sure.
But at some point, you're going to turn that corner where the big checks are going to be a real possibility and inevitability. Yeah, of course. Have you given thought to like what you want your career earnings to look like?
Man, I don't have like a number. I don't have a number. You know, I think by trying to be the best mixed martial artist of all time, that is what comes with it, right? It's like I said, you know, there's going to be some net gain from that, whether it's, you know, pride and that sort of thing, honor, whatever it is. But obviously, like you said, additionally, you know, the money is going to come with that. So as opposed to chasing money, okay, for sure, like I do my best to promote myself on social media. I recognize the fact that I'm a professional athlete, not an amateur athlete. I'm not just out there to win. I'm also out there to entertain people. So there's a lot that comes with that, whether it be social media, whether it be presentation, me dressing up like Wolverine or something before a fight, whatever it is.
I loved it, by the way.
Thank you. Whatever it is that gets the ball rolling, you know, for fans, you know, that's a big part of being a professional athlete and making money, et cetera. I understand that kind of stuff comes with it. But at the end of the day, like, I don't know if I've ever seen somebody become one of the greatest of all time and not also make money, right? So that's what I'll focus my sights on that and then let the money come. And I think that way it'll be a little less stressful to have to worry about both at the same time.
You never got nervous before a jiu-jitsu match?
I did, but it's totally not the same as
Didn't
fighting.
you go up against Paul Harris?
Yeah, Paul Harris was the scariest. I mean, that was about as close to an MMA fight as a person could have in a grappling match.
Yeah.
Because Paul Harris will swing at your head. He'll poke your eyes out.
Yeah.
Like he'll slam you, which he tried to do to me.
Right.
You know, he'll do a lot of dangerous things he'll try to, even if he gets a submission, there's a good chance he's not going to let go if you tap.
Right.
So there's unlike most of the time when you compete in jiu-jitsu where you usually have a choice, going back to your previous question, you have a choice as to whether or not you're going to get injured. In a match with Paul Harris, you don't necessarily have the same choice. You know, usually it's a slow controlled break or something and I can tap. It's not so much the case. So that particular match in jiu-jitsu probably was the most terrifying match that I've ever had. Weight advantage considered, like size and strength, just the damaging effects of the opponent. There was so much going into that fight that made it, or sort of match, that made it nerve-wracking for me. But much more so than that was the closest to fighting in MMA that I got, but it still wasn't anything near the feeling of fighting for the first time or even the fourth time.
Yeah, so even this past one, you had a certain degree of intensity. What is your coping mechanism?
So just going back to that, so I remembered I didn't really, of course, like I said, I was anxious and I had a lot of nerves and things, but I didn't really feel it until I got onto the bus to go to the event this time. The first fight, I felt it when they were wrapping my hands, because I never had my hand wrapped before, like by with the tape and everything like that, gauze. So when they're wrapping my hands, I'm like, oh God, I have to get in a cage and fight a guy. Like, that's gonna happen. This is sealing the deal right here, So for whatever reason, that's when the nerves set in. And I was just like having a little mini panic attack. This fight, it was when I got on the bus to go to the event. For whatever reason, as I get on the bus to go to the event, I started to feel a little nervous, and I'm like, you know what, let me try to take my mind off things. I'm gonna watch some tape. This is what I usually do before my sparring sessions. I'm gonna watch a little Mike Tyson. Every time I watch Mike Tyson throw a punch, I'm like imagining my opponent hitting me with that punch. And then I'm like, all right, we gotta switch it up. I'm like, let's watch a highlight of Danny Bill, a kickboxer. I'm watching Danny, and every time he throws a head kick at somebody and it hits him in the head, I'm like, that's gonna be me. And I'm just, it's getting worse and worse. And I just feel my heart just pounding in my chest. And I'm like, okay, I have to shut the tape off now. I just put this down. And it wasn't until I got off the bus that I was like talking to my teammates and stuff, and I started to calm down a little bit. But that kind of, having people out there that I'm very comfortable with helps me a lot. I like to keep things very light and joke around with my teammates and stuff, and having John out there, Tom, my training partner, Drew, it was very, also my manager was there, Jeff, and just communicating with all those guys and kind of joking around helps kind of calm the nerves and grounds me more back.
Once the fight starts, walk me through your nerves.
So once the
bell rings.
So, oh yeah. So it's funny that you mentioned that, because it almost erases everything. Like, sure, there's a little bit of, before the first couple punches are thrown, there's a little bit of tension, because you haven't actually got hit with that 4-ounce glove yet. But for me, when that bell rings and I got the guy in front of me, I have ADHD, I have trouble paying attention to things, but there's a very real fear of this dude knocking you out. So I have to have laser focus, right? So everything fades away. I'm not thinking about anything. I don't hear the crowd. I barely hear my coach. I just see that dude in front of me. So honestly, a lot of the nerves kind of fade out, and everything goes to whatever I did for training. So he threw a low kick at the beginning of the fight, and I immediately went for a takedown. That was not a decision I made. I actually didn't plan on taking him down that early. In my head, I was walking myself through it. I was thinking about some different combinations I wanted to throw, this, that, and the other thing. And then that low kick happened. Body just folded and went in for a takedown. And that was just pure instinct. That's what I've been doing in training constantly. So my body said, there's the opportunity to take him down. He's up on one leg, go for the takedown. Once I got a hold of him, I was like, well, he kind of got up for a second. I'm like, no, stay on top of this guy. Again, there weren't really decisions that I was making. It was just kind of training setting in. So once it gets to the actual fight, there's so much going on that I don't know how much I'm actively able to think and be anxious about the situation.
Did you do that in jiu-jitsu too? Did you ever, I know you weren't nervous, but did you ever have moments where, because it just seems these days of guard pulling, everything is so concerted with the game plan. Did you ever have moments where you went on semi-autopilot like that?
Yes, but jiu-jitsu is very different, because in jiu-jitsu, there's a lot more time to think. In jiu-jitsu, there's a lot of periods of time where there is no action, okay? Maybe not in my fights, but in many fights, and you have the ability as an athlete in jiu-jitsu many times to either do things actively or do things statically to stop your opponent from really, for instance, if you really want to just not let somebody pass your guard or attack you, you can just continue to pommel your legs on the inside. And that kind of stalls the action, and you can give yourself a couple of seconds to think. If you're just not mentally with it yet, you can take that time, right? So in jiu-jitsu, I definitely felt some more anxiety because of I didn't always need to do something. I could just keep my opponent at bay, and there was no danger for certain periods of time. In MMA, there's always danger. The only time that there's not danger in MMA is perhaps when you're in a perfectly dominant position where they can't hit you, or if you're completely away from the opponent and there's so much distance they can't strike you. Those two things happen for very short periods of time in the sport. Right. So it's rare that I get to get inside my own head, but in jiu-jitsu, you could get inside your own head sometimes, and I like listening to my own heartbeat, while I'm holding on to somebody, all right, you really need to go to try to submit this guy now, And I'd freak out a little bit. I've had matches like that in the past, but in MMA, it's a little different. It's harder for me to do that.
I'm not going to ask you how long you're going to be with one, because everything's going well, so let's just leave it at that. Here's what I will say.
Sure.
You know what rematch I want to see in MMA?
What's that?
I want to see you versus Kron.
Yeah, man, I was dying for that. Before I even signed with one, the first thing that I said was I wanted the match so bad. For years, I was asking for it in jiu-jitsu, and then I kind of laid off because it was like, all right, it's not going to happen. And then I saw him fighting in MMA, and I'm like, well, I want to get into MMA too. I was like, let me see what I can do to drum up some, attention and see if I can, maybe get that fight, like as one of my first fights. And I was reaching out to some organizations. By the time I had already reached out, I think he had already faded out of whatever. I think he was in Ryzen or something.
Yeah.
I think he was already out of Ryzen. I didn't know that. So I was talking with them a little bit, but it didn't really seem like that was going to happen. And now he's in the UFC, so obviously, again, it's a lot of distance in terms of time as to whether or not we'd be able to fight. I think the very real possibility would be more so the grappling rematch. Would I like to fight him in MMA? Sure, but fans have to recognize when they see these cross-promotional things like, one fighter in one and one fighter in UFC, to realistically see a fight like that happen, even if all parties wanted it to happen just because of contracts, you're talking years down the line.
Yeah.
Like you really are. Very rare for that red tape to just get cut, like for any reason. It's almost impossible to do. So I prefer to just talk about things that could really happen. Could a grappling match between me and him, a rematch, happen at any moment? Absolutely. There's nothing, as long as the UFC says it's okay. I know one allows me to do other matches outside of one, and they would even do the match in one. I don't know if the UFC would let that happen, but that is something that could happen. We could have a grappling match. Right now, couldn't happen. But again, I would absolutely love that rematch in either grappling or MMA. It's just hard for me to talk about in MMA because I just know it's not going to happen for a
No, I
while.
know. I was merely wish listing that kind of thing.
Sure.
I will say this. Did you watch his fight against Caceres?
Yeah, it was great. I actually was I think it was in an airport at the time. I forget where I was going, but yeah.
I mean, here's my thing about it. It's like, obviously his ground game and yours, it doesn't get a whole lot better than that, really. He does seem to me, though, some of these Gracie guys, they're sort of like so into the Gracie way.
Sure.
I didn't know that I saw a whole lot that gave me some confidence about his long-term stand-up. I could be wrong about this. I'm not making any bold declaration. Whereas you, it's like, there was a joke, do you know BJJ Scout on YouTube? He jokes about it because there's people when you fight in the comment section being like, this Tonon guy, maybe he has to work on his ground game, but his striking's coming along real nice. It's just like, oh my God. But you have certainly invested. I don't know that again, if he takes it to the floor with anybody, it's going to be a hard day.
Sure.
But, when he was doing that lot of Gracie stomp to cover distance, I was like,
yeah.
I don't know. Did you see the same thing?
So I agree with you in most respects. I think even Hickson's came out and said, I don't know if Kron has ever said this, but I think Hickson's come out and said, like, everybody that does jiu-jitsu and they're doing it in MMA is going about doing things the wrong way. I'm paraphrasing. I'm not 100% sure about this. I think he has been quoted before as saying, like, oh man, they should really just focus on jiu-jitsu. That's what made the fighters of the past great. That's what they just focused on jiu-jitsu and they didn't really worry as much about the punching and kicking and stuff. Whether or not he's taking that strategy, I think it's pretty clear in most of his fights that that's the general idea, is to use jiu-jitsu and not really focus on the striking aspect. We haven't gotten a real chance to see, I don't know necessarily,
that's a fair point.
what it would look like. I think he's been handling his fights similar to the way that I handled my last fight, where it was like, all right, let's just get the job done. But I will say, I wish him success in the future because anybody that comes from a jiu-jitsu background that does MMA, I want to see them succeed. Because for me, it's like a win for jiu-jitsu. It's like, yeah, jiu-jitsu does work in MMA because there's always that argument that people throw out now. Because like you said, less jiu-jitsu guys are transferring to MMA, whatever. Oh yeah, jiu-jitsu doesn't work in MMA anymore, right? So it's awesome to see a guy like him, just use jiu-jitsu and win a fight. So I hope he succeeds. I hope that, just like you said, long-term, that those striking skills do develop so that he doesn't run into a guy like Khabib, for instance, and really struggle to put him away with just jiu-jitsu because he's a tough guy to take down or get control of or whatever the case may be. So yeah, I would like to see that if it isn't already there.
In your judgment, is there kryptonite for Khabib on the ground? I interviewed Brian Ortega. This is before the Holloway fight.
Sure.
He seemed to think that he had the answer. Again, it's a different weight class too, but
sure.
When I say good guard, I mean like a world-class guard. Is that a kryptonite for Khabib in your mind?
Could be.
Depends on the guard, I suppose.
Yeah,
right?
It really depends. I don't know if guard in particular. I think we've seen Khabib submit people before. Do I think he's capable of getting submitted by somebody who's a high-level submission artist? Absolutely. I don't know if I'd necessarily call it a kryptonite, like it's like this major hole and he has no idea what he's doing.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'd take things that far. but I definitely would say that it's a way that a person could approach winning a fight with Khabib. I think if I was saying to myself, all right, what's the best ways to tackle this fight? Submission would be high on the list, as far
you can't
as
fight off the takedown, right?
I wouldn't say can't. I just say that's a tough thing to do.
You fought 28 Bamas, all 28 or whatever it is, 27.
There was one guy that fought off his takedowns.
Gleason Tebow, but even then,
Tough dude, but he did it.
He did. He was also a weight class above, and then got popped later on for roids. So it's like there's some diciness around.
Sure.
I had his coach on last week. We asked him how big do you have to be to fight off his takedowns? Is you got to be Luke Rockhold size?
Yeah.
The gym legends, I don't really know.
Sure.
But it would seem to me like, why waste energy trying to confront something on his terms in that way when you can do it on yours with the guard?
Sure. And the other thing to remember is that while you're fighting off the takedown, there's submission opportunities. It's not to say like, oh, let's just get taken down and work for my guard like you're stating. Well, maybe as he's taking me down, we go for a guillotine. Maybe as he's taking me down, I go for a kimura. Maybe as he's trying to take me down, I'm able to go after the legs, for instance, right? There's a lot of opportunities that I would refer to as submission wrestling that would be there as someone's trying to take you down, not necessarily along the thought process of, all right, well, I'm definitely getting taken down. What are we going to do from the guard, right? So I think there's more opportunities associated with submissions available for a guy like that than just, working off your back.
Any fighters you really admire, like, as a fan? Just like when you watch him, like, God damn, this guy's just, or lady.
Absolutely. I definitely love Khabib's style. I think you saw in my last fight, I've used a couple of the techniques that you've seen Khabib using as far as like single wrist trapping and things like that. So big fan of his grapple box. I've been a big fan of Damian Maia and his work on the cage, his work on, getting to the back from all positions. Huge fan of, obviously this is a little biased because he's on our team, but George St. Pierre. As far as his shoot boxing is concerned, it's pretty close to unparalleled in the sport as far as the way that he sets up takedowns. So those are the kind of guys in mixed martial arts that I model myself after. Damian for that kind of control and that cage work. Same sort of thing with Khabib. And then George for the actual let's get it to the ground sort of style. And then there's, as far as like striking and things are concerned, integrated striking, guys like Max Holloway I find to be pretty intriguing. He's got some really interesting things. Israel Adesanya is pretty amazing as well. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of guys. I do a lot of studying. There's definitely some names who you just shoot out at me and I'd be like, who's that? And I have to look at them. I'm not great with names, but I'm getting better as I'm studying more and more tape. Because most of the time when I'm watching these fights now, I'm not watching as a fan like I used to. I'm watching as a student. So when I'm watching these fights, I'm not even necessarily paying attention to like who's who or whatever the case may be. I'm just like, all right, what technique is this guy using to, defeat this guy? So a lot of times that kind of slips through the cracks as to who it necessarily is. But some of those guys are so iconic and so good at what they do, it sticks with me in the back of the head, the ones that I mentioned.
Do you have like a favorite jiu-jitsu guy of all time practitioner?
For MMA or for jiu-jitsu?
Pure jiu-jitsu.
Pure jiu-jitsu.
Are you a Hodger guy?
Yeah, Hodger was definitely somebody I looked at a lot coming through the ranks. But what I started to realize is that I'm not saying that Hodger doesn't have things that everybody could do, but Hodger has a very specific body type. Yeah. So I believe everybody could learn from the things that Hodger did for sure. But I gravitated away from him as I got better because I was kind of like, this isn't exactly my body type. I don't really know if this is exactly, what's going to work for me. Back when I was coming up, I watched, originally Andre Galvao was in my weight class. I was a middleweight at the time. And then I finally stopped eating so crappy, at least prior to tournaments. And then I started cutting down. I was lighter and I started watching more of the Mendez brothers. Yeah. So I was big fans of them. And Kron actually too. I thought Kron was amazing. Marcelo Garcia. When I was studying for ADCC, Marcelo is probably one of the people that I watched the most, Marcelo and the Mendez brothers, as far as technique was concerned. Marcelo, watching him a lot with guillotine work and some sweeps and off balance. He's just really a really good all around the game. Yeah, I have a lot. It's hard I hate favorites. Like I don't really like to choose favorites, even with anything, music, nothing. I'm very much like the kind of guy that goes to a restaurant and like chooses the different things every single time. I'm always trying new things. So I hate just as far as like when you look at martial arts or anything like that, I hate just looking at one person and trying to model myself off that person. Even in life, I think that everybody usually gets very good at certain things and then a lot of the other things suffer or they're not very good at them, right? I mean, everybody can't be great at everything. They can't be perfect. So I think it's much better to look at this guy for this, look at that guy for this, look at this guy, as opposed to just like, I'm going to model my entire game off of this guy, because now I'm just gonna be a slightly crappier version of that guy more than likely, because that guy's spent his whole life developing those skills. What are the chances that I'm going to somehow get better than that person was at that particular skill set? I'd rather try to take a little bit of what he's good at and then a little bit of what the other guy's good at, you know?
Fair enough. A couple more questions for you and what you run. Appreciate your time. Are you an In-N-Out or a Five Guys?
Oh, Five Guys, like 100%.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. All these West Coast dullards, you got to get the fries animal style. I'm like, you got to get the fuck out. That's what you got to do, because it ain't as good as Five Guys. Dude. Thank you. Thank you.
Dude, first of all, who even puts Thousand Island dressing on salad, let alone French fries?
Clowns,
It's just not even a desirable dressing to begin with. Now we're gonna put it on French fries, and the French fries are like paper thin.
Yes.
It's like eating that flag that's on your desk.
Yes.
Like, I'm not even a big fry guy, but that's a whole different story. I don't know, man. I think it's good.
It's fine.
I just don't think it's like some remarkable, amazing thing that the Californians would like you to believe it is.
Yeah.
And do I necessarily think that about Five Guys? I think Five Guys is pretty good too.
Yeah, it's not the best thing ever.
But again, I don't like the way people rave about In-N-Out. I'm just like, you guys talk about this like this is God's gift to burgers, and it's just not that good. Like, calm down. It's like a notch above McDonald's, maybe. Like,
yes. Thank you. God, I'm so happy you said that. I have this fight all the time with these clowns.
I'm gonna get so much crap. Both of us.
Oh, I'm gonna get hate mail.
Sure.
You know what? It'll be hate mail from idiots.
They're gonna burn down the office for sure.
You know what? Gotta break a few eggs to make an omelet. Before you go, can you talk to me about the weight cutting process or the weigh-in thing that one does?
I want to do like a whole video on this because
hold on, let me give you my position on this. I'm not in any way suggesting that one is not telling the truth, but you got to remember my position in this scenario. I'm a media guy.
Yeah.
The media doesn't cover the weigh-ins and they don't release the numbers, and so immediately red flag goes up.
Yeah.
Not saying it's not true, but I'm on the outside looking in, and there's no organizational transparency.
Sure.
I'm going to have questions.
I've never asked them why they do that.
They didn't used to.
I probably should ask them why they do that, because I agree with you. From the outside looking in, it's hard to say like. It would be hard to say like, oh, they're being transparent if, like you said, they're not releasing numbers or they're not allowing media in or whatever the case may be. I'm sure they have their reasons. I wish I could say what those reasons are, but I actually have never specifically asked. I know many other people like yourself have raised questions about that. Who knows, maybe they'll answer it in a further interview or something like that. Yeah. I don't know if anybody's publicly asked it and they deflected or if they actually tried to answer it. I'd have to research it to find out. But I will say this, to my knowledge, this is the way that things work. We have 2 weigh-ins and 2 hydration tests, okay? So you weigh in 2 days before your fight, you weigh in 1 day before your fight. Along with each of those weigh-ins, at the same time, or moments after you weigh in or before, whatever, you have to take your hydration test, okay? And if your urine is shown to be dehydrated, the only people that would understand what I'm talking about right now is collegiate wrestlers or like scholastic wrestlers, because they often have to do this at the beginning of the season to gauge how much weight they're allowed to lose during the season, which weight class they're able to fight in. But in one, you have to do it for every fight. Whatever your weight is, it has to be a hydrated weight. So if I'm 170, it has to be a hydrated 170. I can't dehydrate 20 pounds and then show up, and then when I pee, my urine will show up dehydrated. They literally watch you do it, so for sure there's no cheating it, you know? But what I will say is, you don't necessarily, when I first came to them, I fought 170, right? When I had my second fight against Rahul Raju, I realized that was not my weight class. That dude was huge compared to me. Yeah. So he was a giant. And I realized like there has to be some amount of weight that you can cut and still pass this hydration. Because walking around, like if I'm eating healthy, I'm really more like 165-ish. Right. If I'm really eating healthy. Right. So I was like, I'm scratching my head. I'm like, I think I could probably find a way to get to 55. So what you have to do is you have to really drink a lot of water, and then you can do your weight cut, and you can lose some water. I don't think you can lose I think even 10 pounds of water would be that would red flag their hydration test. I think somewhere between like 5 to 7 pounds is probably the max that you can go from a particular body weight and cut down from, right? I don't think you can do much more than that and actually pass their hydration. So all I'm saying is that based on the way that they order things, you wouldn't be able to have a dude like Khabib who walks around at over like 200 pounds and fight 155.
Yeah.
I think that's impossible in their organization. So in some ways, it's great because now I know that I'm not going to fight the dude as long as you know how their weight cutting system works anyway. Because it took me 2 fights to figure that out. I'm not going to fight a guy that's 30 pounds heavier than me. Even Rahul Raju being bigger than me at 170, he wasn't 30 pounds bigger than me. It's like 15 pounds bigger than me, maybe, right? So having said all that, in that way, it's good. You know, guys aren't losing this crazy amount of weight, but in the sense that you have to do it twice. So now I got to make weight 2 times. That's kind of rough. You know, it's just tough to do that 2 times in a row. And it's a little bit of a shortened weight cut. I can't weight cut for 12 hours because I'm going to be dehydrated, right? So you can only do it in a certain short period of time. So if you're running or whatever it is, you got to do it in a very short period of time. Overall, though, is it safer for the athlete? Probably.
Certainly
because you're not losing nearly as much weight.
Certainly seems that way. Last thing, do you see your opponent weigh in?
Do I see no. I think we go in one at a time. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, okay. No.
Again, all I'm saying is, if it's as good as they say it is, and everyone I've ever talked to individually raves about it.
Yeah.
I'd like a little more transparency.
Yeah, absolutely. Supposedly, so if you miss either one, the first day or the second day, hydration or weight, you have to weigh in the day of the fight. So they give you like 3 opportunities to make this work.
Interesting. Okay.
And I definitely didn't want to weigh in the day of the fight, so I try to make sure that I try to make sure I nail those first 2 weigh-ins. So.
All right. Well, I got to tell you, Garry, you're a class act, man,
Thanks,
and I'm really happy for your career growth. I know you came all this way with no news to share, which I'm incredibly bitter about. However, I will say this:
very soon.
When do you think you might be able to give us some information about your next fight?
It's hard to say with them. I never know for sure. Oh yeah. Well, let's see. Yeah, within the month they should have information. I would hope. I hope. I think it only helps them to release it within the month so that I could start promoting this thing. But absolutely, I'll be fighting very soon. Quick turnaround time. Tough guy. Southpaw this time, and we're gonna be fighting in a ring instead of a cage.
Ooh,
it's a little tricky.
All right.
So I'm gonna have to learn how to do that, which would be interesting. So I'm a little worried about that because I haven't really done any training inside of a ring. I do all my training, in fact, in a cage just to simulate what I'm going to do out there. So interesting to see.
Well, if anyone's up for the challenge, it's you. Thank you so much for coming in, man. I really appreciate it. My man Joe's going to take you out.
Thank you.
Best of luck.
Thanks.
And
Thanks
I really appreciate you making the effort to come
no
inside.
problem.
All right. There he is. Garry Tonon, one of the best.